Payback times.
The new savings account glowed on my laptop screen, a digital anomaly in the meticulously ordered landscape of our joint finances. Just over $15,000, a recurring transfer of $1,500 on the 3rd of every month for 10 silent months. No note, no label. My finger hovered over the trackpad, the sterile hum of my home office the only sound. A secret. The word landed in my mind, clean and sharp as a new scalpel. I found him in the kitchen, pouring mineral water into a crystal glass. The scene was a photograph from our life. Herbs on the windowsill, the smell of fresh basil, his relaxed shoulders after a long day. I was reconciling the accounts, I said, leaning against the cold marble. I saw a new savings account, number 8874. For a fraction of a second, his hand stilled on the bottle. Then he turned, his face softening into an affectionate, slightly sheepish smile. "Ah, you found my little project. I was hoping to keep it a surprise." He came over, his arm a familiar weight around my waist. "It's for our anniversary. Next year is 15. I was thinking 3 weeks in the Seychelles. Private villa, the works. I've been stashing away the fun money so it wouldn't feel like a big hit to the household budget." His explanation was reasonable. Charming. The rehearsed fluency of it, however, settled in my gut, beside another anomaly I'd stared at just hours before in my professional office. The quarterly financials for Sterling and Sharma had lain on my glass desk, our firm's 22% growth highlighted for the partners. But my focus had been locked on Appendix C, the subledger for the Emerald practice. The single anonymous trust Julian had brought in 5 years ago, assets in the high 8 figures, fees deposited like clockwork. He handled it personally. I'd trusted him. The expenses spoke in vague, expensive platitudes. $18,500 for consultant fees, $12,000 for market research, $4,800 monthly for administrative support. I knew the cost of every paperclip in my own trust and estate practice. This ledger was a professional ghost. One line item had hooked my attention. $2,200 to Crestwood Residential Property Management, LLC. I knew Crestwood. They operated in Oak Haven, 3 hours north, managing high-end condos, not commercial property. Why would a law firm's business development practice need a residential property manager? "That's incredibly thoughtful, Jules," I said now, returning the squeeze in our kitchen. "But you should have told me. I saw it and my legal mind went straight to unreported asset. You know how I am?" He laughed, the rich, warm sound that had always disarmed me. My brilliant, suspicious wife, always on duty. Forgive me? His kiss on my temple was a whisper. "Of course," I murmured into his shoulder. But later, behind the locked door of my home study, I wasn't thinking about white sand beaches. I was thinking about opacity. I spent my days drilling a first principle into my clients, mostly women in the early, shattered stages of divorce, the non-negotiable demand for comprehensive financial disclosure. It wasn't about trust, I'd tell them. It's procedure. The law mandates a full accounting, because what you don't list, you can't divide. Hiding an asset is infinitely easier than discovering one after the fact. Julian knew this. We'd built our firm on this bedrock. 2 anomalies. A pattern was a theory. 3 points made a case. The blue light of my desktop washed over my framed degrees. Using my secure legal research credentials, I accessed the statewide property registry, a tool I use daily to trace hidden assets. I searched for Crestwood Residential. They managed about 40 properties. I cross-referenced the dates of our firm's payments with their acquisition records. One match surfaced immediately. A condo unit in the Pinnacle building in Oak Haven. Crestwood had taken over its management 2 years and 3 months ago. The owner of record was not a person. It was an LLC, Greystone Holdings, LLC. I pulled the filing. Registered agent was a generic services company in Delaware. The member was listed only as private, a ghost. The purchase price was listed as $825,000, all cash, no mortgage. My breath shallowed, an anonymous trust funding vague expenses. A ghost LLC buying a luxury condo for cash. A secret savings account fed from our joint checking. The compartments Julian was building weren't just financial, they were structural. He was creating a separate shadow entity, and he was using our firm, our shared assets, to fund it. The monthly transfer wasn't for a villa. It was a slow, steady drip, moving marital funds into an opaque, controlled space. The principle screamed in my head, the one I taught every client facing a financially sophisticated spouse. Opacity is the first tool of deception. It's not the hidden bank account that ruins you. It's your ignorance of its existence. The law can only help you with what you can prove exists. Julian wasn't just hiding money. He was building a life raft with materials stolen from our shared ship. And the truly chilling thought was this. He was a lawyer. He knew exactly how to do it and how to make it look innocent. The emotional betrayal was a storm cloud on the horizon, but I kept it at bay. This was a discovery phase, fact pattern analysis. My husband was potentially engaging in fraudulent conveyance, diverting marital or partnership assets in anticipation of a dissolution. The professional violation was as profound as the personal one. I needed to see it. The condo. I needed a fact I could touch. The strategic part of my mind, the part that planned witness examinations, took over. Going myself was reckless. If Julian had any inkling I was suspicious, it would tip my hand. I needed eyes, not a presence. I became a litigator, not a wife. Through professional networks, I identified a local freelance process server in Oak Haven, a retired cop named Mitch, discreet, experienced. I drafted a carefully worded email from a secure anonymous service, requesting photographic documentation of the pinnacle and its general activity level for the next afternoon. I attached a photo of Julian from the firm's website. Do you recognize this individual as a frequenter of the property? A shielded digital payment served as a retainer. It was after midnight when I finally went to bed. Julian was already asleep, his breathing deep and regular. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, the distance between our bodies a yawning canyon. The man I'd built a life and a practice with was a stranger operating in the dark, and I was now operating in the dark too. The game had begun, and neither of us could acknowledge the board. My phone, set to silent, vibrated on the nightstand. A faint, insistent buzz in the black room. I picked it up, the screen's light a painful slap. A text from an unknown number. It contained a single image. I tapped to open it. The photo was crisp, taken from across the street earlier that evening. It showed the sleek, modern facade of the Pinnacle. And there, under the portico, was Julian. He wasn't in a suit. He wore dark jeans and a casual jacket I didn't recognize. He was smiling, not his boardroom smile, but something softer, more open. He was holding the hand of a small boy, maybe 4 years old, who was looking up at him with an expression of pure, happy trust. The caption below the photo consisted of 2 words, "Need counsel?" The cold, professional unease in my chest shattered. In its place rushed a torrent of clarity so vicious, it was physically painful. The Emerald practice wasn't a client. It was a second life. The condo wasn't an investment. It was a home. The savings account wasn't for an anniversary. It was for a child. The threat in the message was palpable. Someone knew. Someone knew about Julian, and now they knew I knew. But the greater horror was the image itself. The smiling man, the trusting boy, the perfect, silent tableau of my husband's other world delivered to me in the dark. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. I looked at Julian's sleeping form, the familiar line of his shoulder, and I saw a fraud. The stakes were no longer just $750,000 in joint assets or the firm. The stakes were the entire architecture of my past 15 years. Every memory, every trust, every shared dream was now suspect, a potential prop in his performance. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I slowly, carefully picked up the phone. I save the image. I save the number. I erase the message thread. I lay back down, eyes wide open, staring into the dark. The game board was now illuminated. He had built a trap for me, a life of beautiful lies. And someone from the shadows had just handed me the first tool to dismantle it, nail by nail. The quiet observation was over. The hunt had begun. The text message glowed in my memory, a persistent and toxic star in the dark behind my eyelids. I did not sleep. I planned. By the time the gray light of dawn filtered through the bedroom blinds, the shock had been processed and compartmentalized into a case file in my mind. Sterling versus Sterling. The client was me. The opposition was the man breathing softly beside me. The assets in dispute were everything. I moved through the morning routine on autopilot, through shower, dress, and coffee. Julian was ebullient, chatting about a potential new corporate client. He kissed my cheek, his lips warm and familiar. I smiled and reached up to adjust his tie, a wifely gesture from a decade of habit, and felt nothing but a cold and calculating distance. The performance had begun. My first call, made from a park bench a mile from the office on a burner phone, was to Lydia Chen. We had faced off 2 years ago in a nasty and high-profile divorce, where the husband had attempted to hide 8 figures in cryptocurrency. She had been hired by the wife. I had represented the husband under the firm's directive. We had lost. Lydia had dismantled our client's digital obfuscation layer by layer. I had respected her, even in defeat. Lydia, it's Anika Sharma. I have a potential client referral. A sensitive matter. The kind that requires your particular talent for following money through a labyrinth. Her voice was crisp and no nonsense. I'm listening. The preliminary theory is a spouse using a professional partnership as a conduit to divert assets into a separate life. Real estate, shell companies, vague business ledgers. I need a full forensic map, but the engagement must be invisible. The opposing party is highly observant and legally sophisticated. A pause followed where I could almost hear her sharp mind ticking over the subtext. You're referring yourself, Anika. It was not a question. I did not insult her by denying it. Yes, my firm's retainer will cover your fees under the billing code for the estate of Mercer case. I will provide all necessary internal access. You will report only to me. Another pause came, shorter this time. Send me the details. I will need signing authority for your firm's bank and investment statements, all practice ledgers for the last 5 years, and any corporate credit card records. I will start with the labyrinth. The second call was to David Ryland, a divorce litigator with a reputation for strategic ruthlessness. We met at a crowded and noisy cafe downtown, not his office. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with calm eyes. This is off the record, David. Hypothetical consultation. He stirred his coffee. Hypothetically, I'm listening. Hypothetically, a managing partner at a law firm discovers her spouse and co-managing partner is likely funding a second family through firm resources. She has a photo, a mysterious ledger, and a gut feeling. What is step 1 before she even breathes the word divorce? David leaned back. Hypothetically, step 1 is to secure her own position within the firm. Change any passwords he might know. Lock down her personal credit. Document her contributions to the firm's value, including client lists and origination credits. Hypothetically, she should assume every piece of communication is monitored. Step 2 is to gather evidence within the framework of the business, not the marriage. Initiate a routine financial audit. It is a standard governance practice. It gives her legal cover to subpoena bank records and examine all transactions. It turns her personal suspicion into corporate oversight. And the marital assets? She does nothing that would tip her hand. She does not drain accounts. She does not move money. She observes and documents. The moment she acts out of marital anger, she loses the strategic high ground. The goal is to freeze the landscape before the other party knows the weather has changed. He took a sip. Hypothetically, your hypothetical friend is in a brutal position. The professional entanglement makes the personal betrayal a nuclear device. It can destroy everything, including license, reputation, and livelihood. She needs to think like a general, not a wounded spouse. That is what I told her, I said, my voice dry. Back at Sterling and Sharma, I embodied the general. I called a brief meeting of the junior partners. Given our growth and the complexity of our practice areas, I announced, my tone all business, I am initiating a routine and firm-wide financial audit. Best practices for governance. It will be conducted by an external forensic accounting specialist, Lydia Chen. She will need access to all of your ledgers and supporting documentation. Please give her your full cooperation. There were nods and a few questions about scope. Julian, sitting at the head of the table, looked pleasantly surprised. Excellent initiative, Anika. Transparency is our hallmark. His endorsement was smooth and effortless. He saw it as a bureaucratic box to check, a sign of my diligent and detail-oriented nature. He did not see the trap. In my office with the door locked, I began my own parallel audit. I changed every password to every account I controlled, using a new and complex algorithm he could not guess. I called our estate planning paralegal and had her messenger over a new will and trust package for my signature, removing Julian as executor and primary beneficiary and replacing him with my sister. I titled it as part of a client file review exercise. I scanned and saved years of personal tax returns, property deeds, and investment statements to a secure and encrypted cloud drive he did not know existed, and I began to mirror him. That evening, I cooked his favorite meal, lemon saffron chicken. I poured the wine. "You were right about the emerald practice," I said, leaning into the table with my eyes warm. I looked at the bottom line again. That revenue is carrying us. I have been too focused on my own cases and my own clients. I am sorry I doubted the strategy. He beamed and reached for my hand. "See? That is why we work. I look at the horizon and you keep the ship steady." He squeezed my fingers. "In fact, I was thinking with returns being what they are, we should consider moving some of the firm's reserve capital into the emerald structure. The growth potential is exponential. We could set up a dedicated investment vehicle." My heart was a block of ice, but my smile never wavered. "That is a big step, Jules. Let me think about it and run some numbers." I was agreeing in principle, just as David Ryland had advised. String him along and let him think he was winning. A week later, Lydia Chen set up in a spare conference room, her presence explained as a consultant reviewing our accounting protocols. She was a small and fierce woman with a perpetual frown of concentration. I brought her the emerald ledger. "He has layered it," I said, my voice low. "Client fees come into the main operating account. Then there are transfers to the emerald subledger for business development. From there, payments go to vendors like Crestwood Property Management or to consultancy firms that are probably just shelf fronts. I found one LLC that bought a condo. I need you to pierce every veil." Lydia's fingers flew over her keyboard, pulling up the firm's bank feeds. "The first veil is always the bank," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "People think shell companies are invisible, but money leaves a digital stain. Every wire and every ACH transfer has a footprint." She showed me her screen, a complex spiderweb of transactions. "See this payment from Emerald to Vertex Consulting? Same day, Vertex sends a payment of almost the exact same amount, minus a small fee, to Greystone Holdings LLC, your condo owner. It is a pass-through, a rinse." She drilled down further and cross-referenced the firm's client trust accounts. These were sacred and segregated accounts, where we held client funds for settlements or real estate closings. My blood ran cold as she pointed out a pattern. Look here. Over the last 18 months, in your probate practice alone, there are 74 instances where client disbursements were rounded down. A settlement of $152,467.83 gets a wire for $152,467.80. 3 cents gone. A real estate holdback of $89,211.45 gets $89,211.40. 5 cents. Tiny and insignificant amounts. Rounding errors, I said, but the dread was coiling in my stomach. Consistent and algorithmic rounding errors, Lydia corrected. She pulled up a separate spreadsheet. I aggregated them. Those errors total $18,652.77. And guess what? Every month, a lump sum transfer in a similar amount, never exact but always close, moves from the firm's operating account into the Emerald Ledger as a miscellaneous administrative adjustment. She looked at me, her expression grim. He is skimming from client trust accounts, Anika. He is laundering the skim through the Emerald Ledger to fund his other life. The room tilted. This was not just betrayal. This was professional suicide, disbarment, criminal prosecution for misappropriation of client funds. He was not just stealing from us. He was risking everything I had built and the entire firm's standing on the altar of his double life. The controlled rage I had been keeping at bay threatened to erupt. I closed my eyes and breathed in the sterile and recycled conference room air. Document it all, I said, my voice scraped raw. Every transaction. Map the entire flow from the client trust account to the condo's property tax bill. I need a report that even a skeptical state bar ethics committee could not ignore. The firm's annual summer cocktail party was a special kind of torture. The rooftop terrace was strung with lights, the hum of conversation mingling with jazz from a live trio. I wore a navy silk dress, smiled until my cheeks ached, and played my part. I was the gracious managing partner and the devoted wife. Julian was in his element, holding court by the bar. I watched him with a glass of champagne bubbling untouched in my hand. He threw his head back and laughed at something a junior associate said. The picture of charismatic success. I saw the faint lines around his eyes and the effortless charm, and now I saw the calculation beneath it. This was all a stage to him, including our marriage. This firm and these people? He caught my eye and excused himself, weaving through the crowd to my side. He slipped an arm around my waist and pulled me close. Having fun, my love? His breath smelled of gin and mint. It is a wonderful party, I said, leaning into him and resting my head on his shoulder for a moment. The scent of his cologne, once so comforting, now made my stomach clench. You have been working so hard? He murmured into my hair, his voice dripping with concern. The audit? Your caseload? You seem stressed. You should take a vacation. Go visit your sister in Santa Fe for a week. Get some sun. I can hold down the fort. There it was, the patronizing dismissal. You seem stressed. The not-so-subtle suggestion to remove myself from the board. He was so confident and so sure of his control. He believed my diligence was just manageable neurosis, and my discovery phase mere busy work. I looked up at him, my eyes wide and guileless. Maybe you are right. After the partner review, meeting next week. I want to be here for that. I let a hint of excitement color my voice, especially to discuss your idea about investing more in the Emerald practice. I have been looking at the numbers, and I think you are onto something big. His smile was triumphant. See, I knew you would come around. He kissed my forehead. Now circulate and mingle. You are the best asset this firm has. The night wore on. I mingled, laughed at jokes, and asked about children and vacations. All the while, the report was compiling in Lydia's conference room a damning testament. She had pierced the final veil. The shell company that owned the condo, Greystone Holdings, had a single beneficial owner, listed on a private banking form obtained through a subpoena power Lydia wielded under the audit authority, Julian Alexander Sterling. The mortgage payments, the property taxes, the utilities, all flowed from an account funded by the Emerald Ledger, which was in turn fed by the firm's operating account and the skimmed client funds. The day before the partner review meeting, the air in the office was thick with unspoken tension. Lydia had delivered her final report, 3 binders of evidence, charts, and transaction trails. They sat in my locked desk drawer, their weight palpable. Julian came into my office without knocking, closing the door softly behind him. His charming facade was gone, replaced by a cool and watchful intensity. The whispers had reached him. Someone on the accounting staff had perhaps mentioned how thorough and how forensic Lydia Chen's questions had been. "This audit," he began, his voice quiet but edged. "Lydia Chen, she is not just reviewing protocols, Anika. She is digging deep." I looked up from my computer, feigning mild confusion. "That is her job, Julian. A financial audit is not a superficial review. You endorsed it." "I endorsed a routine check," he said, taking a step closer. He leaned on my desk, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "Not a witch hunt. People are getting nervous. They are asking me what is going on." His eyes searched mine, trying to find a crack. "Are you looking for something? Is this about that silly savings account? I told you it was a surprise." He was gaslighting, trying to reframe my systematic investigation as petty marital suspicion. The old Anika might have softened and might have doubted her own judgment. But the old Anika was gone. I held his gaze, my own utterly calm. "This is about firm governance. It is about our fiduciary duty to our partners and our clients. If there is nothing to find, Julian, then you have nothing to worry about." I deliberately used his full name. It hung in the air between us, a formality that was a weapon. A flicker of anger, quickly masked, crossed his face. He straightened up, a sneer touching his lips. It was the expression of a man who believed he was the smartest person in any room, who had talked his way out of countless jams. "Fine, have your audit. But remember, we are a team. What affects the firm affects us both, dramatically." It was a threat, thinly veiled, a reminder of the nuclear device David Ryland had warned me about. "I am well aware of the interdependence," I said, my tone neutral and professional. "That is why the review tomorrow is so important. We need full transparency before we even consider moving firm capital. For the good of the team." He stared at me for a long moment as if seeing a stranger. Then he shook his head, the sneer settling into a mask of confident amusement. He believed down to his bones that he could talk his way out of anything, that his charm and his legal acumen would allow him to explain away the layers, the shells, and the rounded sense. He believed the binders in my drawer were just paper, and he was a master of narrative. "Tomorrow, then," he said, and left, closing the door with a soft and definitive click. I waited for the sound of his footsteps to fade. Then I opened the desk drawer. My fingers brushed the cool and pebbled surface of the top binder. The trap was not just set, it was sprung. He had walked right into it with his arrogance his own undoing. Tomorrow, in a room full of our partners, the labyrinth he built would be revealed not as a fortress, but as a prison of his own design. The general had laid her siege, and the walls were about to come down. The conference room smelled of expensive coffee and nervous anticipation. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished mahogany table where the 6 equity partners of Sterling and Sharma were seated. Julian stood at the head, radiating confidence, a sleek laptop connected to the wall-mounted projector. He wore his winning case suit, the charcoal one with the subtle pinstripe. I sat to his right, my posture erect, hands folded on the table. In front of me was a slim folio. Inside was not paper, but a single encrypted tablet. Lydia Chen's 3 binders were safely in the hands of my lawyer, David Ryland, who waited in my office down the hall. My wedding ring, a band of platinum set with a single emerald, was in the top drawer of my desk. My finger felt strangely light. "Colleagues," Julian began, his voice a warm, inclusive baritone, "thank you for your time. As you know, today we're reviewing the firm's performance with a special focus on our highest growth segment, the Emerald Practice." He clicked a button and a vibrant slide filled the screen. It showed a soaring green-tinted graph. As you can see, revenue from this single client relationship has increased 300% over the past 36 months. It now constitutes 28% of our total firm profit. The partners, Robert, Susan, Michael, Isabel, and Ben, leaned forward, impressed. They saw the bold lines and the impressive percentages. They did not see the layers. Based on this trajectory, Julian continued, clicking to a new slide proposing a strategic capital allocation. "I move that we approve the transfer of $500,000 from firm reserves into a dedicated Emerald investment vehicle. This will allow us to leverage opportunities and conservatively double this revenue stream within 18 months. He looked around the table, his gaze finally landing on me, expectant and benevolent. He had prepped them. This was his moment of triumph. "Before we vote on new capital," I said, my voice clear and calm, cutting through the agreeable murmur, "we have a prior agenda item, the report of the audit committee." All eyes shifted to me. Julian's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. "Of course, Anika," he said, gesturing magnanimously, "a necessary formality." I stood picking up the tablet. I did not go to the head of the table. I remained at my seat, turning the tablet to face the room. With a tap, I mirrored its screen to the projector. Julian's vibrant green graph was replaced with a stark, chronological flowchart. As part of our routine governance audit, engaged forensic accountant Lydia Chen conducted a full review of all practice ledgers and supporting financials. I began. My heart was a steady, purposeful drumbeat. What began as a procedural review uncovered significant anomalies requiring partner attention. I tapped the screen. The flowchart zoomed in. Let us start with the Emerald Practice Ledger. As Julian noted, the revenue is substantial. The expenses, however, lack substantiation. I brought up a list of payments to Vertex Consulting, Crestwood Property Management, and Horizon Demographics. Standard vendor due diligence was requested. For these payees, no contracts, no invoices, and no W-9 forms could be produced. Julian chuckled, a soft, dismissive sound. "Anika, these are discrete relationships. The client demands confidentiality. You know this." "I know that in law, opacity is often the first tool of deception," I said, my eyes still on the group. "But let us follow the money the law can see." I brought up the bank transaction records Lydia had mapped. A line shot from the Sterling and Sharma operating account to Vertex Consulting. Another line, dated the same day, shot from Vertex Consulting to Greystone Holdings, LLC. Vertex is a pass-through, a shell. The ultimate beneficiary of these firm funds is Greystone Holdings. I changed the screen to the property records. The deed for the Oak Haven condo appeared, owned by Greystone Holdings. A residential property, not a business asset. Purchased for $825,000, all cash. I let that hang for a beat before the next slide. It was the banking signature card for Greystone Holdings account. The beneficial owner was clearly listed as Julian Alexander Sterling. A frozen silence gripped the room. Robert's mouth had fallen slightly. "Open!" Susan stared at Julian, her eyes wide. Julian's face had drained of its warm color. "This is a gross invasion of privacy," he blustered, standing up. "This so-called audit has overstepped. That is a private investment, unrelated to firm business." "The funds originated from the firm, Julian," I said, my voice like ice. "But let us explore the source of those funds." I brought up the most damning slide, Lydia's analysis of the client trust accounts. The columns of rounded down disbursements, the aggregated totals, the matching administrative adjustments into the Emerald Ledger. Over the past 18 months, small systematic amounts have been skimmed from client trust accounts, which are segregated and sacrosanct funds. These sums were funneled into the operating account, then into the Emerald Ledger, and ultimately to Greystone Holdings. "To your condo." The gasps were audible now. This was no longer about a hidden affair. This was about the bedrock of our profession. This was disbarment territory. "She is fabricating this," Julian shouted, his charm vaporized, replaced by a frantic, cornered anger. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is a paranoid fantasy, a hostile takeover attempt because she is jealous, because she cannot stand that I built something she does not control." I did not look at him. I kept my gaze on the other partners, whose faces were now masks of horror and betrayal. "When you suspect financial infidelity," I said, and the term hung in the air, covering both the marital and the professional crime, "the law gives you tools. You do not have to just suspect. You can discover. Forensic audits, subpoena power under corporate governance rules, tracing orders. We use the firm's own rules to uncover the fraud against the firm." I took a breath. This was the final veil. But the fraud is not just against the firm or our clients. It is against all of you personally. I brought up the last document. It was the loan agreement for the firm's line of credit, a $2 million facility we used for case expenses and cash flow. Every partner had personally guaranteed it. Highlighted was a rider, signed by Julian alone, 6 months ago, pledging a portion of that line of credit as additional collateral for the mortgage on the Oak Haven condo. He did not just use stolen client money. He used our collective credit and your personal guarantees to secure his asset. If he defaults, the bank comes after each one of you. That was the spark that ignited the real fury. Professional betrayal was one thing. Personal financial risk was another. "You son of a bitch," Michael breathed, pushing back from the table. Julian was wild-eyed, looking from one furious face to another. "She is lying. She has twisted everything. I can explain." "The explanation," said a new voice from the doorway, "can be filed with the court." David Ryland stood there, accompanied by a uniformed process server. David walked calmly to the table and placed a stack of papers in front of Julian. "Julian Alexander Sterling, you are hereby served. Petition for dissolution of marriage, citing fraud, waste, and dissipation of marital assets. Temporary restraining orders freezing all accounts in your name, including Greystone Holdings, are attached." The process server then handed a second, thinner set of papers to each of the other partners. "By unanimous consent of the partners present, save for Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice finally allowing a sliver of the fatigue I felt to show, "I move to suspend Julian Sterling from all partnership duties and voting rights, effective immediately, and to refer all findings to the State Bar Association for investigation." The votes were a swift, grim chorus of ayes. Julian did not even argue. He was staring at the divorce papers, his shoulders slumped, the magnificent edifice of his lies crumbling around him in the silent, sunlit room. The public humiliation was complete. It was not shouted. It was etched in the disgusted faces of his peers and in the cold finality of the legal documents. His reputation, his partnership, and his marriage were all dismantled in the space of 20 minutes. He finally looked up at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw not anger, but a baffled, almost childlike confusion. He had never believed I could do this. He had never seen me as an adversary of equal force. Without a word, he gathered the papers, his movements jerky, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed was profound. The meeting dissolved into a frantic, anxious discussion. I let them talk, absorbing their shock and fear. Then I laid out the path forward. The firm would immediately make restitution to every affected client trust account, with interest. We would cooperate fully with the bar. I presented the buyout agreement David had prepared. The firm would purchase Julian's partnership share for a nominal $1, in light of the fraud and the potential liabilities he had inflicted, with a full release of claims against the firm and the partners. It was brutal, but it was the only way to surgically remove the cancer. They signed, their hands still shaking. An hour later, I was alone in my office. The late afternoon sun cast long golden rectangles across the floor. The building was quiet, shell-shocked. On my desk, in a small ceramic dish I used for paper clips, the emerald from my wedding ring caught the light, a cold green glint. I felt no joy and no triumphant thrill. What I felt was a profound, clean quiet, like the stillness after a vicious storm has passed. The high wire tension of the last few weeks had snapped, leaving behind a solid and unshakable ground. I turned to my computer and opened a new document. I titled it Sharma and Associates Pro Bono Initiative. In the body, I began drafting a proposal for a monthly legal clinic at the Willow Road Women's Shelter, focusing on financial rights, asset tracing, and understanding disclosure obligations. The lesson learned in fire would now be my practice. The phone on my desk buzzed, an internal line. It was Susan. Anika, the sign company is here. They need to know what to do with the old logos on the street level directory and the lobby wall. I looked out at the city skyline, the building sharp against the deepening blue sky. Tell them to remove Sterling and from everything, I said, my voice steady. Just Sharma and Associates will be fine. I hung up and returned to my proposal. The emerald in the dish winked once more, a relic of a buried life, before the sun moved on, leaving it in shadow. The new file on my screen glowed white and clean, waiting to be filled.